Kerfuffle fans, welcome back to another episode. I'm Sean Kling, your host, and today we've got David Fradin, a man of many talents from around the world and an author, and even got a little surprise of some royalty in there. So without further ado, David, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be with you, and it's nice to be a legend in my own mind.
You know, when I was in the Army, my drill sergeant used to say that. He used to say, I'm a legend in my own mind. And when we used to walk into the bay, we used to have to say, "At ease, the legend's in the house."
Well, when I was in the Civil Air Patrol, I couldn't tell the difference between my right and left when we marched. So they gave me a brick to stick in my left hand.
So there is so much to unravel with you, so much going on. You've led an extraordinary life. You've got so much in your family history. You've got so much in your personal history. I mean, I don't even know where to start, but you know, I think the first things first is let's tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where you live, and you know, a little bit about your history.
I live in Silicon Valley. Been here for 45 years. I used to work on the ground beneath that building over my right shoulder. That is the Apple spaceship campus in Cupertino. And before that, it was a Hewlett-Packard campus. And I worked at building 43, which is right in that back corner.
Okay. And then, you know, I was reading somewhere that you worked or at the same level with Steve Jobs at Apple.
Yeah, I was the business unit manager of the Apple III product line, making money while Steve was losing money trying to get his Macintosh developed as the general manager of the Mac division. I asked for the title general manager. They said, no, you got to be the independent business unit manager, or BUM for short.
That's interesting. So tell me a little bit about that stuff. I'm genuinely interested in, like, you know, the tech and the world like that. You know, it's so you read about things or you see things on television or on the internet, but you don't really know the real story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember in the late 80s, John Sculley, who was president of Apple for the second year that I was there, he wrote a book about his experiences in Apple. And since I was an expert as the bum on the Apple III, I picked up his book in the bookstore and at the airport when I was traveling, flipped to the index, looked up Apple III, then went to the 2 or 3 pages that he mentions it, and it was all wrong. And I had one guy tell me that he wants to grow up and be just like John Sculley. And that's one of the problems of following these audio biographies that were written by ghostwriters. They make stuff up in order to make the author look good. It's sort of like Donald Trump's Art of the Deal, which was ghostwritten. So you have to be real careful about that and go to the primary source, not the secondary or tertiary source.
What did you find were the main differences in, like, what the ghostwriter wrote versus what the truth was?
Well, the person that introduced the Apple III, the first product manager, is a guy by the name of Steve Jobs. And he failed to ensure that there was any quality assurance on the manufacturing of the computer. So when it was shipping in the fall of 1980, it would arrive with the dealer's dead on arrival, called DOA at the time. And it turned out that the chips used in the circuit board would work their way loose during the shipping process. So they never bothered to build a computer and ship it to somebody else, you know, in a box and see what it looks like when it comes out of that box. So they were all dead on arrival, or many of them were. And a friend of mine, Semi Asafor, who worked in service, found that if he lifted the thing up about a foot above the table and dropped it, all the chips would seat themselves, and then the computer would boot up. But Steve was so self-obsessed at that time with himself, he shipped the computer without an operating system. And as a result of that, it also did not have any software. So for the first couple of years, you could do nothing with the Apple III. So he campaigned that the computer was a failure in order to cover up for his personal failures. And then Apple hired some overpaid MBAs from Harvard and from MIT and from Stanford, and they could never figure out what the market was for the computer. So they all kept saying that the computer was a total failure, when it wasn't. At that point, when I took over, they had shipped 50,000 of the Apple IIIs, and it was the third most popular computer in the world by units. First was the Apple II, second was the DEC PDP-11, and the third was the Apple III. And then in the last year of its life, when I was the business unit manager, we generated enough cash, so I think it was about $600 million in profits, to help pay for the Mac development. And if Steve was successful in killing the product line as he wanted to do, he would have been in bad shape trying to find the money to finish his Mac development. And we also created enough profit to keep about 1,000 to 1,500 Apple employees employed. And about 6 months after I shut the product line down, those 1,000 to 1,500 Apple employees were let go because the cash just wasn't there for them. So if you want to talk about failures, let's talk about Howard Hughes' Spruce Goose first, and the Apple III last.
So, but I imagine, like, and this is the first time I'm hearing this, that was probably, a lot of that was kept hush hush at the time for stocks and stuff like that, or just in general.
There was a rumor going around in the late 80s that the reason they shipped the Apple III early is because the company is going to go public in October of 1980. And if they revealed the problems that they were having with it and and did not ship it then, it would have affected the initial stock offering price. I don't know if that's true. The guy that I worked for, Ken Zerby was his name. He was the CFO at the time, and he said that's not the case. So I don't know, but there was an effort to cover up the failures of management and marketing, which goes on today. In fact, this is August, 14th, 2025. And David Pogue from CBS Morning Show is about to put out a book about the Apple history. In the previews of it, he says he's interviewed 300 people and talked about the Apple III as a failure. And I was not one of those 300 people that he talked to. Yet everything I've just talked about is in the last 30 pages of my book, Building and Sailing Great Products. And I published Building and Sailing Great Products in 2016.
Oh, wow. Let's talk a little bit about that book. So now I'm interested with this stuff with, the cover-ups and, I don't want to say a cover-up, but we'll use that term, non-exposure, I guess we should say. But let's talk a little bit about your book and how you talk about these things and, any other good, juicy stuff. Because, my followers are always interested in this type of thing.
Well, let me add that in terms of the public story of Apple during those times, it came from a public relations firm called McKenna, I forgot his name, Regis McKenna and Associates. Regis was one of the first investors in Apple. And in fact, he was the one that introduced Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and the other founder, whose name I forget, to Mike Markkula, who had just retired as a 32-year-old marketing manager for Intel, the chip manufacturer. And Mike put money into it. And later, when they let Scott go as president, he took over as the interim president. And he was president for the first year that I was at Apple. And then the second year was John Scully. So they had a vested interest to cover up the mistakes they made with the Apple III. And the funny thing about it is when I took over as the Apple III group product manager, before they promoted me to being a bum, I asked all of the wise MBAs at the company, who was the product built for? Who was the customer? What problem were we trying to solve? And they couldn't answer the question. So therefore, they thought it was a failure because they did not know who the product was for. So I went and talked to a fellow by the name of Jeff Raskin, J-E-F Raskin. And Jeff was one of the initial key architects for the Apple III, engineer, computer scientist. And I asked Jeff, who did you build this for? He said, I built it for the business and office market. And he was in the basement of the Triangle building that our offices were in along Highway 280 and Lawrence Expressway in San Jose. And all these bright MBAs couldn't figure that out, that it was focused on the business and office market to be able to do things like word processing, databases, spreadsheets, accounting, and so forth. Some of the key functions that were currently being done on time sharing and mini computers in the world could now be done on your desk for a fraction of the cost.
Wow. I mean, all you ever hear about Apple is the story about how Steve Jobs left and he came back and he saved the company, and then he got cancer and he died, and then, the Steve Jobs quotes and stuff. I mean, God rest his soul. I don't, talk bad about anybody that's passed away, but that's all you ever really hear about Apple. And then now all of a sudden, we're not, I want to say all of a sudden, but a lot of stuff is starting to come to light that, you never really hear in a lot of the media or in outlets and stuff like that.
Well, there was two Steve Jobs. I like to call it Steve Jobs 1.0, which I knew, who was crazy, and I tried to stay as far away from him as I possibly could. And then there was Steve Jobs 2.0 that got enlightened after all of his failures. He had the failure with the introduction of the Apple III and didn't sell for very well for several years because he lacked having an operating system and software to do anything with it. And then he came out with, became the general manager of the Lisa Group and shut that thing down and affected the stock price of the company. And shortly thereafter, he got kicked out of the company. Well, he marketed with mirrors, which is John Scully's explanation when they introduced the Macintosh, and they fooled 100,000 people to buy 100,000 Macintoshes, only to find out that the thing had 128K of memory, which they knew. But what they didn't know is because it was a pixel screen, which required 64K of memory all by itself, plus the operating system, the largest program you could write would be 10 kilobytes. And you couldn't do much with that. So you really couldn't do anything with that other than use it as a paperweight. So the Mac sales throughout 1984 was 100,000. It was introduced at the Super Bowl in January of 1984.
The famous commercial. It was a famous commercial, yeah.
Yeah, and then sales dropped to 4 units in January of 1985. And Steve is the runner of that division plus Lisa, and then his abysmal end of life that he did on Lisa. So they eventually, the board pushed him out of the company because he was an abysmal failure. Then he went on to do another computer, which he called Next. And at the time, I was the associate director of the Personal Computer Information Services at DataQuest, a market research firm, and doing about 100 media interviews a month. And I'll never forget the lady reporter for the Business Week Bureau out of San Francisco came into my office at DataQuest and said, "What do you think of the Next computer?" I said, "You mean Last?" And sure enough, that was an abysmal failure. He had completely mispositioned it in the marketplace. And then he had all sorts of trouble with Pixar. And I found in my, which was about to go out of business after he bought it. And I found in my research for building and selling great products that Steve sought out Dave Packard, one of the co-founders of Hewlett-Packard.
Hewlett-Packard, right.
Yeah, former defense, deputy defense director, secretary of defense. And Dave was chairman of the board of HP at that time. And I knew Dave fairly well because I used to handle his personal PR when I was in corporate PR department of Hewlett-Packard several years earlier. And in 1989, he sat down with Dave. And one of the things Dave taught Steve is don't be afraid to cannibalize your own product, because if you don't do it, somebody else will. So he listened to that. He also apparently listened to the importance of having values and following values. And when he came back to Apple, in fact, one of the things he commented about is one of the keys to Apple's success is that it has a set of coherent values that it follows. And that is, in my opinion, one of the reasons that the company's one of the most valuable companies in the world.
So you say that there's two Steve Jobs, 1.0 and 2.0. Did you know him when he came back? Did you spend any time with him, or just kind of
No,
saw it at a distance?
I just saw him at distance, and I remember in the early 2000s, uh, a group of former Apple employees got together, about 20 of us, had breakfast, sat around in a circle, and I made the comment then that if um, uh, Steve Jobs 1.0 was like Steve Jobs 2.0, Apple would be the most valuable company in the world. And everybody in the room agreed with me that the values that he had back then when he was 1.0 was not concurrent with the values of Apple at the time. And he adopted them and then implemented them, even to the point of letting the iPhone come out to replace the iPod.
Hmm. Yeah, you're talking about the early days of home computers, and I remember that. Not everybody had a home computer, and it must have been a hard sell for just to get people to buy computers because people didn't trust them, or they only saw things in movies that computers would go haywire and take over the world and all that stuff. So I imagine the monumental task of even just trying to market those products to people that were computer illiterate versus today, where everybody's got the cell phone, small computer in their hand. That must have been like kind of challenging. And then you're dealing with this internal strife where you're not sure if there's going to be a year from now with these products.
Yeah, the market penetration of personal computers when I was at Apple was just 4%.
Wow.
And a lot of people said, what do I need this thing for? So we ran ads, the company ran ads. Would someone please tell me what you could do with an Apple II? And it listed all the software that was available for the Apple II. And then we ran ads, please tell me what I could do with an Apple III. And then we listed the software to convince people that these things were tools that could be very helpful.
I remember back in the late 80s, I was in junior high and we had a Macintosh, and it was one for like a classroom of like 30 kids, and all the kids would stand in line, and we played it. I think it was the Oregon Trail or something like that. I mean, that was my first inception. I didn't own a personal home computer until probably after the year 2000, 2001, something like that. So the market penetration, even with the younger generation, was probably very difficult.
Yeah, very small. And a lot of people didn't know that they would find anything useful. Mike Markla, in fact, wrote a checkbook program for the Apple II just to help have some things as to what people would use it for.
So you have a book called Building Insanely Great Products. Let's talk about that. What's the 30,000-mile view of this book, and all this cool stuff. It looks like a really neat book. I think I might actually, I might get this. Is it on Amazon or?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's also available in Vietnamese in Vietnam.
Oh, really?
One of the fastest growing, what do you call it, economies of the world. A lot of entrepreneurship there. But it goes through the 5 keys to product success, which the mnemonic SPICE for my company's name, Spice Catalyst, talks about. And then it gives a number of different examples of each of the keys of product success. The S stands for have a product market strategy. The P stands for having repeatable processes that mature. The I is having the information necessary to make informed decisions. The C, which is the most important, is to understand your customer, what it is that your customer wants to do, why they want to do it, when, where, why, how, what's standing in their way, how important is it to get it done, and how satisfied are they with the current solution. And then the E is the 130 competencies or skill sets people must have in order to have successful products.
So if somebody wanted to buy this book outside of Amazon, is there any place else they can get it? Can they go to a website? Do you have a website? Do you have another location like Barnes & Nobles or anything like that?
Yeah, I forget, there's a publisher that's just about to make it available to Barnes & Noble as print on demand. but on Amazon, it's available as a soft-covered book, as and as an audio cast.
I was going to ask you if you had audio, because myself, I love to read. I read a lot of books, but a lot of times when you're driving and you're spending a lot of time behind a wheel, that's audio books are like the king for me.
Yeah. Well, I narrated it, so people may not want to buy it.
Nah. Well, I mean, it's, I give my hats off to you, because a lot of authors today don't narrate their own books. They have somebody else, they pay somebody, or they're starting to use AI for it. Now, that's a question I had for you. As a person that's worked in the tech industry, what's your feelings on AI, and where do you see, this whole thing going?
Garbage in and garbage out. I use an AI tool called Perplexity, which does a nice job of skimming the internet, pulling everything together, and giving you a succinct answer. Well, if it happens to skim something in the internet, which was a lie, sort of like Elon Musk's Gronk AI, which immediately regurgitated his anti-Semitic, pro-Hitler, Holocaust lies, and amplified it as AI. And if you don't know what the sources are, that's the garbage in, garbage out. So I'd stay away from Gronk, and I'd also stay away from anything coming out of Facebook or Meta, because they're using the Facebook posts to train their AI in the same way Gronk is using Twitter posts to train their AI. So if the AI doesn't tell you where it got its information from, run away from it as fast as you can.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about the show, and before the show, I'm sorry, and I don't go on Twitter because it's just a cesspool. Like, I've never gotten anything remotely ever good out of Twitter at all. But so as far as like AI though goes, I was reading someplace that AI has, emotional things, like emotional triggers, that they try to support you even though you're wrong. Like, you can say like, oh, I have a black spot on my face. Is it cancer? Oh no, that's just makeup that got on your face, or something like that. Have you heard these things?
Oh yeah, there are people that are going to marry or have married their AI pet.
What?
And there, tens of thousands of people are in relationships with their AI chatbot. And then, in fact, some people have been convinced to kill themselves and have committed suicide, encouraged to do that by an AI chatbot. So that's some of the dangers.
Yeah, I mean, from what I'm seeing with AI anymore is, the plagiarism thing. You're starting to see a lot of that, a lot of shortcuts when it comes to actually physically doing work, lack of research, lack of time to do anything. And I would say most of all, just the misinformation that's coming out. I mean, we use AI here at our office as well, but you can't write a book. You can't do certain things with it, because either the answers are very, very generic, or, I can say for myself is I found a bunch of just misinformation, just so much misinformation.
Yeah, I have a test for each AI. I'll put in my name and see what it comes back with. And in the case of Perplexity, is about 95% right. I tried it with Microsoft's AI and got about half of it right. And then I tried it with my former business partner's name, and it said things like that he is a graduate of MIT. He never went to college, and listed three companies that he worked at. He never worked at those companies. So it probably confused his name, which is a fairly common name, with someone else of the same name, and then put them together without verifying that they were the same person. So yeah, it seems to me, if I could test the quality of an AI with those simple tests, that chat CBT just came out with 5.0, and then withdrew it from the market because it was not giving correct answers. If I could test it, why can't they test it?
Right.
Or they produce it.
Yeah, I'm a huge history geek, and I love history. I love the study of world history, and we talked a little bit about some of that. We'll get into that. We talked a little bit about before the show, but I've put things in with history into different bots just to see what the answers were. And as a person that, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, so Gettysburg, Valley Forge, all that stuff was there, and I'd been there, school trips and all that stuff. And I just found so much misinformation about things that were in it. It's interesting, and I just wonder where the future of this is going to go as people become more reliant and more lazy to just have something else do their job for them.
Well, they've already done that. We have people, I think 100 people were killed in India a few years ago based upon something that somebody was saying on WhatsApp in terms of mistreating cows. 100 people died, and it turned out to be a lie.
Wow.
I don't know. I think the guy's name is Andy Borowitz. He's a humorist.
Okay.
He does a daily report, and it's all in humor. Like he proposed that Trump was going to trade Florida for parts of Ukraine to Putin, and so stuff like that goes viral, and people believe it. The ability to reason, the ability to think, the ability to double check your Facebook and your Twitter or X things. And now with AI video stuff on Instagram, or what's that other thing that China has that keeps getting banned?
TikTok? The TikTok?
Yeah. So the lack of learning what basic civics in, like there's some members of Trump's cabinet can't tell you what the three branches of government are.
Yeah, and that's stuff we learn in first grade. You learn that when you're a young buck in school.
Apparently, civics has been dropped from the school curriculums of many schools around the country.
Wow. Now that I didn't know. And that kind of upsets me hearing something like that. As a veteran and my father was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. My grandfather was in the Marine Corps World War II. And you sit there and you're like, what did we serve for? And I'm not trying to say I'm better than anybody else. I'm just saying is, we served so that people could participate in government, understand government. We might not always all get along, but at least you have a basic knowledge on the operations of how things work.
Yeah, I agree.
So now getting into a little bit of the history stuff, because I brought up my father and my grandfather, you wrote a book, Letters from Hymie.
Yeah, Letters from My Hymie. My dad's name was Hyman, Hyman, and he sometimes went by the nickname Hymie, Hymie. So these letters from my Hymie have nothing to do with letters from my vagina. They have to do with a bunch of letters that my dad wrote home during World War II when he served in the Marine Corps, the Army Air Force, the Coast Guard, and in KP, in Kitchen Patrol, because he was always getting in trouble. And they're pretty humorous letters, and it traces the history from, at that time, around 1940 through about 1945. And then I got, as part of these letters that my cousin sent me, a 18-page autobiography that my grandfather dictated to one of my aunts, who was also knew how to take shorthand. And it talks about his growing up in Ukraine, Russia, and becoming a blacksmith, and becoming eventually the blacksmith to the governor of Kyiv. To him, the governor giving him a few $100s and told him in 1914 to get the hell out of the country before the 9th pogrom occurs and they will kill him. So he left the country, emigrated to New York, then to Baltimore, where my dad was born, and then Washington, D.C. That's where my dad grew up, in Georgetown of Washington, D.C.
That's interesting family history. I mean, so your father's a first-generation American.
Yes. And going through the research of the genealogy, There's a Fradin group on Facebook. There's like 300-400 members of that. Someone posted that there's a book of Fradin, which was published in France around 1900. And it's all in French. And I can't read it because I flunked French in junior high school. So I ran it through Google Translate and found out that my grandmother left Spain in 1492. She was probably looking for Columbus.
Missed the boat. Missed the boat.
Yeah. But in actuality, there was a Inquisition in Spain where they're telling the Jews either get out or we'll kill you, or convert to Catholicism. And she was traveling north through southwest France with some of her family, I assume, and they got surrounded by a bunch of robbers. And this gallant man on horseback came out with a sword and a few of his friends and drove off the robbers and fell madly in love with my grandmother. They got married, and later generations became the mayor of Lyon, France. Another member of the family opened the Fradin Winery, which I think is still there. I've been trying to get a case of that. Others served. One became a lieutenant general in Napoleon's army, and another one was knighted a duke by the king of France at the time. And under France rules of aristocracy, if someone in your family is a duke, it's handed down to all the male generations. So therefore, I'm a duke. And then someone reminded me that in the French Revolution of, 1870 or 80 or something like that, they eliminated all titles. So I ignore that. As far as I'm concerned, that never occurred. So I'm a duke. And if you want to get a copy of Letters from My Hymie, you have to search for Duke David Fradin on Amazon. And it was so important that I called my daughter up and said, a few years earlier, I got appointed a distinguished professor in a university in India. So I called her up and I said, Michelle, I just found out I'm a distinguished professor. Can I now get a little bit of respect? And she said, no. And later I called her up and said, I just found out that I'm a duke and I now get a little bit of respect. And she said, no.
So your ancestor, your great grandmother or grandmother that escaped, that would have been, I guess, Torquemada? Would that have been about that same time in the Spanish Inquisition?
I don't know. 1492 was the year.
Okay. Yeah, I knew that one of the inquisitors was Torquemada. That's what I would. Every time I hear that, I think of the movie with Mel Brooks, History of the World, and they had Torquemada. Yeah. Let's face it, you can't Torquemada anything, you know?
I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Mel has a similar background to mine.
So
found out recently that Larry David's genealogy comes from Ukraine, similar to mine. And I was in San Sebastian, Spain a few years ago after giving a speech at the Productize conference in Portugal, and decided to take a cooking school at the San Sebastian Cooking School. And I walked in, and the cooking instructor looked at me and he says, "Are you Larry David?" Because I looked a lot like them back then. And I said, "Yes, I am." And so I stayed in character the whole day. And he went home, and I got an email from him the next morning that said, "I went home last night and told my wife that Larry David was in my cooking class, and my life has never been so good." And I wrote back and said, "Well, congratulations. I'm glad I was able to spice up your love life."
So your father serving in 3 branches of the military, not counting KP duty, because I've had that too. 3 branches of the military. How did that come about? Like, during the Second World War, it wasn't very common to move from branch to branch. I knew my grandfather was drafted, I think, in 1943 when he was 18. And he was in one battle and one battle only. It was called Iwo Jima. Oh. And, he's been passed away now. I think next year is 40 years that he's been passed away. But, I didn't know if you could transfer from branch to branch. It'd be interesting to hear the story of your dad.
Well, I don't know. It's not mentioned in his letters, but it's what he told me orally. I suspect it's because he kept getting kicked out. I know that when he was based in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, he stole the base commandant's motorcycle and went joyriding around the base. They finally caught him. They sentenced him to KP, and he had to peel a couple thousand potatoes every day, which is quite interesting because when I grew up, and he was married at the time to my mother, she did all the cooking, and he couldn't boil water without burning it. For a guy that worked in KP, and since he could speak Yiddish fluently, he was assigned as an interpreter during the German prisoner of war interrogations in Tennessee and in, I think it was South Carolina, where he was based at the time. He also could type. Apparently, he learned how to type when he was in high school. So they made him a clerk. And when he was in Tennessee, they gave him an office, which is a little bit smaller than a closet. And he said Army life is so boring that he started to read Army regulations for their humor.
Oh, my word. Just Army regulations alone, I don't think I could stand that. I mean, they used to make us carry this little book around, and we had to memorize everything in basic training. And I'm like this 18-year-old kid that, and you know, I didn't do very great on my entrance exams. So that just tells you where they put me on the hierarchy. And they made us memorize this book. And I was like, oh, my God. And I couldn't memorize it. So I couldn't even imagine enjoying reading regulations for the life of me.
Well, your mention of Iwo Jima, he was in the Marines and one of the assault groups.
My grandfather was in the 5th Marines, 23rd Regiment. He was a 50 caliber machine gunner. That was his one and only battle. We only have 2 pictures of him from the 1940s. One where it's like a basic training photo, what everybody gets. And then one when he came exactly home from the Marine Corps. It was 1946. I think he had just come home, and my uncle Dick, who was his brother, said that he remembers the first time seeing him, that he came running up the dirt road in an old Indian surplus motorcycle that he got from the Marine Corps when he got out. I guess he might have used some back pay. And that was it. And we never really knew much about his military service. You know, he had today what you would call post-traumatic stress disorder. And, you know, he had been in and out of a lot of legal trouble when he had came home from the Marine Corps. And I remember my dad saying he wasn't really close with his father. And it wasn't until after he passed away that my dad and my Uncle Eddie sent away for his records. And that's how we found out he was at Iwo Jima. And he never really spoke much about that.
No, very seldom they did. I got invited back in the early 70s to go on what was called the Defense Orientation Conference, number 42, that the Secretary of Defense invited influential people in the country to go on. And so we started out at Strategic Air Command in Omaha, Nebraska. And underneath this beautiful lawn is the Strategic Air Command, from which they would launch the B-52s and the missiles. Okay. And then they took us by Air Force plane to Colorado to the Cheyenne Mountain, which is NORAD, North American Air Defense Command, inside that mountain with these huge blast doors. And then they took us to Pensacola, Florida, the Naval Air Training Station, and flew us in a helicopter that was used to shoot the sniper down that was in, I think it was in New Orleans, that was shooting at people. And we landed on the USS Lexington and went below decks and had lunch. And then they took us from there to Fort Benning, Georgia, where they introduced the M16, which was just coming out, the rifle replacing, I forgot what it was that the soldiers in Vietnam were using. And then they took us to Parris Island, Marine boot camp, where I think my dad might have gone through boot camp there. And I was a skinny 5'10", 135 pound guy. And when I was a young kid growing up, my dad would not let me sit on his lap for fear of piercing his bones, bony ass. And then they took us up to Quantico, where my dad had actually enlisted in Quantico, which is also the FBI training area. And we went into a lecture there. And it was one of these, I forget the name of those hangars. It looked like a bowling alley. And then they took us to the Pentagon, where Chappie James, the general, gave us a briefing. So each night we got a different roommate. And one of those roommates happened to be the communications officer on a battleship off of Iwo Jima.
Wow.
Fascinating story. I kept him up all night to tell me all about it. And by about 7 in the morning, he says, I got a bunch of kids and grandkids, and none of them have ever asked me about it.
Yeah. It's my father was in Vietnam in 1969 in the Marine Corps. And the weapon that they used before the M16 was called the M14. And my dad told me that when he was training in the Marine Corps, Parris Island and Camp Geiger and everywhere else the Marines go, they used M14s, and he never actually used an M16 until he got to Vietnam. And he was never issued an M14. I'm sure that they saw them there. I'm sure that some Marines had them at that point, but the M16, then when he came back from Vietnam, he had some time to finish, do his enlistment, and he was a rifle range instructor at Parris Island, and they used M14s again. So he went back to the M14 when he was at Parris Island, but they were only using M16s in country. And a very interesting thing is my father was in Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and they were the highest rifle company casualty of any rifle company in Vietnam. And they have a monument to them. You can look it up at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. And I was there in 2005 when they dedicated. Most of the guys now, a good portion of them have passed away. There's not a whole heck of a lot, but they still do their annual reunion every year.
Yeah, I think the M14 could shoot farther with greater accuracy than the M16, but the M16 could fire more rounds in a given amount of time than the M14 could. Also, they demonstrated putting a hand grenade on the muzzle of the M16, and you could use it as a hand grenade launcher.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know about that. I mean, I know that the M14 is a knockoff of the M1 Garand from World War II. That's just basically an upgrade of it. But the thing, according to my father, and I've never handled an M14, so I don't know what they weigh, but my dad said that thing was god awful heavy. And if you look at me, I'm almost 6 foot tall, 200 and some odd pounds, and my father is 5'4" back then, 120 pounds. He actually got his Purple Heart when he was a tunnel rat. He went down in the tunnel and he captured a Vietnamese nurse, but somebody threw a grenade and it hit him in the face and stuff like that. So,
yeah, I think the rifle weighed more than he did.
Yeah. But the stories, you're talking about your dad and his stories, and I'm talking about my dad and my grandfather, and even going back to when you were talking about Steve Jobs, I think the importance of telling stories for future generations is very important. Putting these things down in books, not relying on AI, because eventually the verbal story is going to go away. My grandfather has passed away. I'd give $1 million if I had it to sit and talk to him about Iwo Jima, but I don't have it. So the next best thing is, obviously the children and the grandchildren that can pass something down in a book. And that's what I really like about, books like Letters from My Hymie is this is a personal touch. This is not just somebody that's researching something. This is actually a son writing about his dad, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's firsthand knowledge.
Firsthand knowledge. Yep. And I really like things like that.
Yeah, and a lot of sick humor.
Well, if he was a Marine, there's a lot of sick humor to start out with.
No, when I was on that defense orientation conference thing, we were flying in a twin engine aircraft, about 8 of us from Parris Island, South Carolina, up to Quantico. And I was a pilot at the time and a flight instructor. And this was a bunch of Air Force people on the plane. And they invited me to play poker with them, which is a huge mistake because I lost everything. And we're about halfway up and it was my turn to deal. And so I got out a few cards to everybody, and then the right engine quit. And I stopped dealing. going to see if, is the pilot going to restart the engine or going to crash or whatever. And one of the other Air Force guys says, deal.
So do you still fly today?
In an airplane, yeah.
Okay. But you no longer are a pilot. You don't pilot an aircraft anymore.
I'm a pilot. I have keep my flight instructor's rating renewed. I used to teach at the Stanford Flying Club in Palo Alto.
Wow.
But a few years ago, I sold my Cessna 210 so I could buy San Francisco 49er season tickets.
Oh yeah, but that seems like that seems like about the price of tickets. I used to have season Eagles tickets at one point, and Philadelphia Eagles I sat in club box seats. I think something like $400 a seat per game, and that's when they were still doing. What would they have? 17 games now, 18 games, counting.
17. Yeah, 17 games plus 3 preseason games.
Yeah, we had 4 preseason games and I think 10 season games or something like that. And then, obviously playoffs, if they went to the playoffs, it was different. But so I didn't know you were a 49ers fan. So I got to ask you, Joe Montana, Tom Brady.
Oh, that's a tough one. I like Joe better. But I should like Brady because we both went to Michigan.
Well, and Brady's from California too.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I'm a big Joe Montana fan. I mean, he was kind of like the hero growing up when I was a kid. Him and Reggie White. I don't know if you remember Reggie White, but
yeah, I remember the name. Well, Brady had a much longer career than Montana had.
Right.
So it gave him the opportunity to win, 7 Super Bowls?
Yep. And the game has changed a lot since then too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I think so. So, but if you had to go back and talk to a younger version of yourself, say your 16, 17-year-old self, with all the things you've experienced between writing books and traveling the world and working in technology, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I think I told myself that back then when I was in the Civil Air Patrol, that is, to thine own self be true. And I wrote that down on a little piece of paper. I used to carry it around in my wallet all the time, which it essentially says, have a set of values and follow those values and don't compromise those values. And that's one of the things I talk about in my book, Building and Selling Great Products, is I looked at the values that companies had back across the Fortune 500 when the first list came out in 1965. And because of my work in national science and technology and had funding for my student organization for a number of those companies, I knew them fairly well. So I put together a little spreadsheet which listed the company names. The first column is, did they have values? The second column said, did they follow those values? And the third column said, are they still in business? In almost no exception, those companies that had no values or did not follow those values, if they had them, they're no longer around. They're gone. Those companies that had values and followed those values are still around. So I took that same advice to myself, and I looked at about 25 organizations I've been affiliated with over the years, from the flying club I started at the University of Michigan, to the Federation of Americans Supporting Science and Technology, which is a student organization in support of science and technology, to the Environmental Balance Association in Minnesota, to HP, to Apple, to DataQuest, and so forth. And I had 3 columns. One is, did they have values? Did they follow those values? Because a lot of organizations have them, but they don't follow them. And then the third column, what happened to me? And in about 20 of those 25, I either got fired or quit because there was an incongruence between my values and their values. To thine own self be true. And the 5 or so that I thrived in and got promoted in, like Apple and like HP, had values and followed those values. So I suggest that to anybody young, considering going to work, to make sure after they, in their interview, get asked a bunch of questions, to ask the question of what is the company's values, and then leave. And then if you get an offer, compare them to your values. And if there's a close match, go to work there. If it's not a match, run as far away as you possibly can.
I mean, you've led such an interesting life and done so many things. And I mean, from being a pilot to, working with Apple to Hewlett-Packard, I mean, like so much going on. I can't imagine somebody like you is going to slow down anytime soon. What do we have in the future for you? What are we looking at?
Well, I just got my taxes for last year done. So now I'm going to, finish a book I started called Trippin, Trippin, Life's Little Laughs. And the subtitle is an unauthorized autobiography.
That's amazing. I don't know where you get the energy. There's people that are 20 years old that don't even have the energy that you have.
It's the gym.
It's the gym. I know a guy named Jim.
No, gin.
Oh, it's the gin.
Gin. Yeah, funny story. A few years ago, I was at the International Tomato Festival in Los Gatos, California, near where I live, and felt very ill. And apparently I turned white, and one of the people there, one of the women said, "You don't look too good. Do you want an ambulance?" I felt horrible. So I said, yeah. So an ambulance came, they stuck me in the ambulance, and then we're going down the main street in Los Gatos called Santa Cruz Avenue. And we're all backed up in traffic as the emergency ambulance is trying to take me to the hospital. And I said, can you do me a favor and turn on the siren so we can get through this traffic? And they said, if you're making jokes like that, you're not that well off that we have to turn on the siren. I said, well, ever since I was a little boy growing up, I always wanted to be on a fire engine or in an ambulance with the siren on. So they refused to do that. And I got into the emergency room. They sent me out for a CAT scan. And a couple hours later, the doctor comes in and says, I've got good news and bad news. He says, the bad news is that you have acute diverticulitis. And I said, what's that? They said, well, that's when you get little pockets in your colon. I said, what, to accumulate lint or something? He says, yeah. And I said, well, I don't want pockets in my colon. He says, and the good news is we're going to give you a wide spread of antibiotics and put you on intravenous fluids and antibiotics. So I had to lay there for another couple of hours. They pumped a few liters of fluids into me, and you're peeing in a bottle. And, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to swear. And,
that's all right.
And the doctor comes in and he says that you have to eat a clear fluids for the next 3 days. This is the normal treatment, the antibiotics and the clear fluids, like Jello and chicken soup and tea and that kind of stuff. So he leaves, and I'm laying there, and of course, he got nothing to do. It's a dark room, and emergency rooms are very noisy, so you can't sleep. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, gin. Gin is a clear fluid, and it has all sorts of healthy botanicals in it. Because gin is nothing more than infused botanicals into vodka. Ooh. So I said to the nurse, I said, can you ask the doctor if as one of my clear fluids I can drink gin? And she says, okay, and leaves. Hour or so goes by, she comes back in. I said, well, what did the doctor say? And she says, I'm not going to ask the doctor that question. So a couple of days later, my general practitioner from Kaiser calls and wanted to check up on me and how I'm doing. And I told her that story, and I said, because the emergency room nurse refuses to ask the doctor if I could drink a whole grain gin, I want her fired. And my doctor says, that's okay. She already quit. Which is true. She actually left that emergency room in Santa Clara and went to work in the emergency room at Kaiser down in San Jose.
So of all the things that you've done, millions of things, I mean, like just countless, what's the one thing that you're most proud of?
Probably saving the Apple III product line, where everyone thought it was a failure. And I was able to turn that around, sell 25,000 Apple IIIs, one out of every three that were ever sold. Not only me, but my team also. I had 16 people working for me, $4 million budget, and earned enough profits to pay for the development of the Macintosh and to keep about 1,000 to 1,500 Apple employees employed for another year or so.
That's like, I'm just blown away. I mean, this is a life well lived. And, I get now where you say, your own self be true, because just the things that you've done, you've lived 5 lifetimes. My hat's off to you. You've lived 10 lifetimes.
It feels like it, but the gin helps.
David Fradin, author of Letters from My Hymie, Building Insanely Great Products, author, businessman, educator, father, great, just all around guy. Thank you for being on our show.
But Duke.
That's right. French Duke. I'm sorry. I didn't want to bring the guillotine out. No, I won't go there. Just all around great guy. And it's been such a pleasure having you on today's show. It really has.
Glad to be with you, or thank you for putting up with me.
And you're welcome back anytime. I love these stories. So until next time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Clean Kerfuffle, and make sure to find us on Spotify, Amazon. We're also on Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio. We're on YouTube. We're all over the internet. You can find us on LinkedIn, and just make sure to click, share, and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for watching.